Hello and welcome to the Drexel Interview. I'm your host, Paula Marantz Cohen, speaking to you from the Leonard Pearlstein Gallery of the Antoinette Westphal College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University. Today my guest is Dr. Walter Cohen, former Dean of the School of Dental Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and a former Chancellor of the Medical College of Pennsylvania and of the Drexel University College of Medicine. Dr. Cohen, who is no relation to me, has received numerous honors and awards, both for work in his field and for contributions to education more generally. He still maintains an active periodontal practice in downtown Philadelphia. I've invited Dr. Cohen here today because he has some fascinating stories to tell. One is a historical tale of accomplishment and adventure with a detective story at the end. The other is a story of cooperation across difference, which Dr. Cohen was involved with in the Middle East. Walter Cohen, welcome to the Drexel Interview.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, I should say to begin, as I mentioned in my introduction, that you're a man of wide-ranging interests and accomplishments. And one of those interests is your desire to improve the image of dentistry, which you feel has been somewhat maligned over the years. And one way of doing this is unearthing the story and telling the story of Thomas Evans, who was a 19th century dentist with an extraordinary tale behind him. Would you tell us who he is, where he came from, and a little bit about what interests you about him?
Thomas Evans was born and raised in Philadelphia in a Quaker family. Actually, his home was on the northwest corner of 40th and Spruce Street. And as a young man, he worked in a jeweler shop. He took courses in medical sciences at Jefferson University. I think it was then Jefferson College. And he was so adept that the jeweler that he worked for told his father that because of his skills, he ought to consider dentistry. And that was before the days of dental schools. The first dental school was 1840 in the United States. But he then took a preceptorship with dentists and became a practicing dentist, actually had a practice in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And one day he was giving a table clinic at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, and somebody who was observing him was so impressed with his work, he spoke to him afterwards about the possibility of leaving for Paris to join a practice that was looking for an associate. Dr. Evans discussed it with his wife, and they sailed in 1849.
So he became a dentist to the stars, so to speak, in Paris, in Europe, even though he trained in the US, or I guess he received the next level of training in Europe?
Well, he joined the practice of Dr. Brewster, who was the dentist to the royal court of Louis Napoleon. One day, the emperor had a dental problem and Dr. Brewster was ill. Dr. Evans took the call. The emperor was so impressed with Dr. Evans, he became the dentist to the royal court thereafter.
So this is so interesting to me. He became privy to all kinds of confidences as a result of being the dentist to these very powerful people. And you've told me, and I wish you'd recount for our audience, that he actually had an instrumental role in France's involvement in this, or lack of involvement in the Civil War.
Yes, he was an advisor to the emperor, and he became the dentist to every royal family except the Habsburgs. So he was very well known and very well thought of, and he had come to America during the Civil War, met with President Lincoln, and Lincoln said, keep the French out of the Civil War. And Dr. Evans transferred that information to the emperor and convinced him that France shouldn't get involved.
Dr. Evans did other things as well. He was not just a scientist and a dentist. and a technician of sorts, he was also very much into the arts. And from what I learned from you, he was involved with the artists of the period. Can you tell us about his relationship, particularly with Monet?
Yes, he had many celebrities in his practice, and also was very close with many prominent people in Paris, especially with Monet. And that was through Mary Laurent, who was a model for Monet and who was very close with Dr. Evans.
When you say very close, is that a euphemism for, was she his mistress?
Well, I think they would say that she probably played that role.
It's a diplomatic way of putting it.
But,
okay.
But he was very kind to her too, and made sure she had what she needed in the way of living and clothes and things of that sort. But as a result of his closeness with Mary Laurent, he also collected a number of Monet paintings and was very involved in an exposition that took place in the 1860s in Paris, where Monet showed a number of his works. Dr. Evans had another great interest. He was at the Crimean War scene and was so impressed with what happened to the war wounded that he himself began to design an ambulance to be used in evacuating wounded soldiers, and was well known at the time for this contribution.
So he was an inventor of sorts as well.
He was very diverse. And
so he thought of himself as a kind of 19th century Benjamin Franklin, especially with this relationship to Paris?
Well, I think that is a great compliment. I don't know that, I think he was very interested in education, because when he passed away, he left his fortune to build, excuse me, Penn Dental School's recent building. And in that regard, he was quite similar to Benjamin Franklin. But I think he was very entrepreneurial, as Franklin was.
And a Renaissance man in terms of
I would
art
say
and
he was
science.
a Renaissance man, yes.
Yeah. He died, and he died in Paris?
He died in Paris. He came to Philadelphia for the World Exposition of 1876, which was held in Fairmount Park and celebrated the centennial of the country. He bought two pieces of art. One was a statue of Benjamin Franklin as a boy, and one of George Washington. They were in my office when I was a dean at Penn Dental School. In fact, I took one of them down and gave it to the provost, Dr. Thomas Ehrlich. I thought one of Franklin belonged in College Hall.
Well, I want to get to his collection in a moment, but first, so after he died, he had something of a fortune as well as a collection of paintings.
Yes.
And where did he had no heir, I take it, no child.
He and his wife did not have any children, and she preceded him in dying early in the 1890s. He also bought farmland before they built the boulevards in Paris, because being a member of the royal court, he knew what the plans were for expanding the city. And I think he had a very successful practice, but he probably was better off in his real estate investments, yes.
So he made money off of the real estate investments before they leveled and redesigned Paris in the 19th century, huh?
And he left his fortune to build a school on the site of his family house.
And where was that again?
Northwest corner of 40th and Spruce Streets. And he was then indicated he wanted the school to be second to none in the world. And hence, Penn Dental School was the great recipient of terrific fortune.
Now, it did take a little while for that fortune to get transferred to its proper place.
Yes, you're right.
What happened there?
The government of France did not want to see that fortune leave France. And there was a lot of litigation, and finally it was allowed to happen according to his will. And the money came to Penn, and there was an interesting Thomas Evans Society started by the University of Pennsylvania to be able to receive the fortune. And he insisted that there be a museum as part of the dental school building. And there was, in the original plans, the museum was on the east side of the first floor.
And so that museum housed his art collection.
It housed a number of things. It housed his Bible collection, which was quite significant and was then transferred to the main library at the University of Pennsylvania. It also housed his dental instruments. It housed the carriage in which Empress Eugenie escaped. And there were a number of paintings and photographs, and a number of gifts were given to him by the royalty of Europe. So in that museum was a big safe, and all of those pieces of jewelry were kept in that safe.
So this is where your story begins to overlap with Dr. Evans. And I want to go back because you knew about the museum because you went to Penn Dental School.
Right.
And it was still in existence then at the site?
The museum was in existence. I was in the class of 1950. After getting out of the Navy in World War II, I started Penn Dental School in 1946. When I was a student, every year the museum was opened on Alumni Day in May or June. And I wandered into the museum, being interested in history and being interested in who Thomas Evans was, because his name was on the building. And I was fascinated by what I saw, not only the art, but there was a beautiful writing table that Tsar Nicholas had given him, and inlaid in the table were photographs of Nicholas and Alexandra and the 7 children. I was very impressed with that piece of work, and when I became dean in 1972, I wanted to find that table.
So when you were in the dental school as a student, this museum was still in place?
In place.
And then when you became dean of the dental school, what was that, 20
72.
years later?
It was, I wandered in 49, and it was 23 years later I became dean of the school.
So there was no museum any longer, but you remembered those artifacts?
Everything was placed in storage.
Okay.
In a warehouse in the Strawberry Mansion area. I wanted to find that table, and I took a person from the art museum with me, and we found it. It was badly warped. I felt very badly about it. But while I was there, I saw a beautiful painting of flowers in a brioche in a Delft dish, and it was signed Monet. And the person that was with me said, you know that Dr. Evans had many paintings. Some of them were not authentic. They were, for example, there were 2 Canalettos, so people thought. They were the school of Canaletto. They were not actually done by Canaletto. So there was a question, is this an authentic painting? Because it was signed Monet. And it was so nice that instead of letting it sit in the warehouse, and we spent a day and a half at that warehouse, I took it back to my office and hung it. But I thought, with all of his works that were throughout the building, that we ought to bring an expert on Monet to the school. So we invited Ann Hansen to come down. She was at Yale and knew everything about Monet, and she came to my office and immediately says, that's a Monet, where's the warehouse? I said, why do you want to go there? She said, I read his will in French, and he owned 3 Monets. And she went with Paul Mackler, who was the art consultant for the university, and they found the second painting, which was flowers in a silver and a glass vase. And then she says, I know where the third one is. It's not in his collection. But she didn't know where it had ended up. But I found out later from Violetta Damazia from the Barnes Museum, she knew the third one was in the Rockefeller collection.
Okay.
The lawyer that settled his case in France took it in lieu of a fee.
Oh, so when France had been wanting the money, is that it, from Evans' estate?
Yeah,
and then he took this Monet out of the collection as his fee. I see. How interesting. What a story that is. So you had this wonderful Monet, this flowers in a brioche, in your office for a couple of years when you were a dean?
Yes, it was there, and Ann Hansen wrote an article in the December '79 issue of Art in America talking about the missing Monets and how they were rediscovered. And
she mentioned that you had good taste.
She mentioned that I had good taste, which I felt very complimented by. But she also helped us, and we decided that we were sitting with paintings that were so valuable we couldn't hang them on the walls of the dental school. So we went to the trustees and asked if we could put them up for auction. And we got permission to do that. And these two paintings were auctioned at, I believe, Christie's in New York in November of 1983. One brought $1 million and one brought 1.1 million. One of them was purchased by the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, and it's still there. I used to visit there, and it was the only Monet in the city of Pittsburgh. It was purchased by a young man who was terminally ill, and he wanted to be buried next to his parents, and people convinced him, if you bought this and gave it to the Carnegie Museum, that could happen, and that's how it got there. I don't know where the other one, where the crystal vase is.
I see. But what a story that is. And you say the Monet that hung in your office is now the cover of a book about Monet.
There's a wonderful biography of Monet, and Flowers in a Brioche and a Delft-dish is the cover, and I didn't know that was going to happen. I happened to be in a bookstore in Nice, and I saw that, and I was shocked.
What a story. So that connects then to your art side, which, like Thomas Evans, you have this love of art and culture. But you also have this other story that I wanted us to explore, which has to do with some work that you've done in the Middle East with the dental program at two universities in Jerusalem. One is Hebrew University, where there is a prosperous dental school, and the other is the Palestinian University, also in Jerusalem, Al-Quds. And you have been involved in developing a program and an exchange between the two. Could you tell us about what got you started in doing this and getting involved in this area?
Well, I got involved with the Hebrew University dental school, which was founded in 1953. And I was asked to help their faculty get graduate training. And we worked out a program where many of them came to the States to take graduate training, get master's or doctorates in addition to their dental degree. In fact, we trained 18 of their faculty at Penn, they came for 2 or 3 years. And I became very much involved with the school, and was founded by Hadassah and the Hebrew University and Alpha Omega fraternity. And I later came on the board of governors of the Hebrew University and later on Hadassah Medical Board. And as things moved on, we were trying to help the community flourish too. And I suggested in 1997 that the school start a Middle East Center for Dental Education, inviting dentists from all the Middle East countries to come to Jerusalem and take a continuing education course for a period of 6 weeks. And we started that in '98, and it was very successful. The dentists who came from Cyprus, from Gaza, from Jordan, throughout the Middle East were thrilled with the program. Unfortunately, it stopped during the Intifada, but following that, when the school opened on the West Bank at El Quds, the dean of that school, Musa Bajali, became very close with the dean at Hebrew University, Adam Stabholz. And I had suggested that maybe he would be able to send some of his faculty to Hebrew University for longer periods to take graduate training. Right now, there are 4 faculty members from El Quds who are getting specialty training in different specialties of dentistry at Hebrew University. And that program has worked out well despite, there was a lot of political pressures that made it hard for people to do this. But it's happening, and I'm really very gratified by the relationship between El Quds and Hebrew University. And
how do you think it was that this was accomplished?
I think it was accomplished because of people who believed in what they were doing. I think it was Musa Bajali seeing that the Hebrew University School was so outstanding that he wanted his faculty to be trained there. And he wanted his students to also be exposed to faculty there. Certain faculty went over to the West Bank. And it was his relationship with Adam Stabholz, which was encouraged by their 2 presidents. The president of El Quds, Sari Nusseibeh, who was a wonderful, I say liberal, he says he was a moderate, but and his family went back 8 or 9 generations in Jerusalem, and his family has the key to the Holy Sepulchre Church. And he encouraged Musa to do this, and Adam got encouragement on the Hebrew University side. So I think it was people who believed in what they were doing and wanted to rise above political factions.
It's an inspiring story, and it's interesting because it's concentrated on dental education, and one wonders whether it wouldn't be possible to have something like this in other specialized areas of education. Have you thought about that?
Well, Drexel University has a relationship with El Quds. They have an affiliation. That happened several years ago when Chuck Pannoni was acting president, and he and the provost, Mark Greenberg, and several others went to Israel, and that was one of the outcomes. And now President Fry and the Hebrew University have developed an affiliation which is also involving Children's Hospital.
Closing here now, because we're running out of time, I just want to say that I think it's interesting how wide-ranging your interests are and your involvement. Do you think that, what do you think the future is for dentistry and for yourself in terms of your notion of improving the image of the field? This is certainly true in the research you did on Dr. Thomas, but also the work that you did in the Middle East. What's the next step here for you?
Me, at age 87, I think my time is limited in what I can do, but I try to be helpful when asked, and I think the field of dentistry is developing very well, and there's been a lot of improvements in dental care. Prevention is playing a great role. We see now that public health is having a real benefit with fluoridation of water and cutting down in Philadelphia dental caries by some to 60% over many years. Temple Dental School now is led by a public health dentist, Dr. Ahmed Ishmael, and he feels that the school has a responsibility to North Philadelphia where it exists and is doing things in the public health area. So I feel that the field is growing nicely, and I think it's a wonderful aspect of the health professions. It has a great future.
Well, Dr. Cohen, I want to thank you for being here. I should say that after talking about Dr. Evans as the 19th century Benjamin Franklin, it strikes me that you're the 20th century Benjamin Franklin, moving into the 21st century, because I don't think you're done yet.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel Interview.